"Did you get the keys?" Theo asked as we got on our bikes and pedaled away from my house. I didn't answer. Instead, I reached into my pocket, pulled out a large key ring, and held it up. "Awesome!" We crossed through the field at the end of our street until we came to the fence that ran behind the old strip mall. We let our bikes fall to the ground, then walked along the chain link barrier until we found a narrow gap that would allow us to squeeze through it. I pulled the metal links to the side so that Theo could squeeze through the fence. Then he did the same for me from the other side. The strip mall we were going to sneak into was going to be bulldozed in a couple of days, and my father's construction company was hired to do the job. The keys I had stolen from his truck gave us access to several of the empty stores. We wanted to explore and see if we could find anything worth keeping before it was leveled. We spent the next hour going through the smallest shops. Most of them were filled with broken glass and damaged fixtures. If there was ever anything of value in them, it was taken a long time ago, but we expected that. Those shops had been broken into way before we got there. We were just messing around as we made our way to the real store we were eager to get into. "Are you ready?" I asked Theo, as we stood before the metal shutters that covered the door to the old department store. The store was called Moore's, and was supposed to be the first location for a chain of department stores. It was the only one to ever open. A series of tragedies struck the family that owned it, forcing them to shut it down for good 20 years ago. The rest of the shopping center died a slow death as the smaller stores went out of business. Without a large anchor store to draw in customers, there wasn't enough foot traffic to sustain them. There were a few tries to revive the location, but none of them ever got very far. There were too many legal hurdles left behind by the Murrow family, which made it too much of a hassle. Eventually, after the last surviving member of the Murrow family passed away, the center was put up for auction. I didn't know what the new owners were going to replace it with. I just knew they hired my dad to level the site. "Let's do it." He pulled a small flashlight out of his pocket as I leaned down and tried to find the key that would unlock the shutters and let us slip inside. "Help me lift it," I said once I found the right key and unlocked it. We each planted our feet and grabbed the bottom of the shutter and lifted it as high as we could. The thing must have been rusted because we couldn't get it more than a foot off the ground. We tried several times, but it wouldn't budge any further. That wasn't a problem, because we didn't need to open any further than that to be able to crawl underneath it. The problem was that we couldn't keep it from falling shut. We needed something to prop it open. That was when I glanced over at the pile of debris that had been collected from the parking lot to make room for the construction trucks. If one of us could run over there and grab one of the concrete blocks, we could use it to prop the shutters open. "I have an idea," I told Theo. "We are going to lift it one more time, and then you're going to shove one of those blocks under the opening." I pointed to the pile of broken asphalt and cinder blocks, and other pieces of construction waste. Theo walked over, selected a block, and then dragged it over to the front of the store. "Ready?" I waited for him to get in position. Once he had his hands in place, I called out, "Lift." "Get the block." I pointed with my chin to let him know that he should put the block under the shutter while I held it up. "Hurry!" I yelled as my arm strained to hold the weight of the mirror barrier when he let go. Once he had it in place, I let go. I held my breath as his shutter came down on the block. When it didn't break, I let out a sigh of relief. "Let's go." I got down on my stomach and crawled through the narrow opening we had made. Once I made it to the other side, I stood up and brushed the dirt off my clothes. As Theo crawled through, I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight app. I walked through the frame of the door. The glass it once held crunched under my feet as I walked into the store. I swung my flashlight around and illuminated the row of checkout lanes. All of the registers had been removed, but most of the wires used to connect them to the store's operating systems were left behind. I found a quarter. Theo held the coin up to the beam of his flashlight, then continued to walk along the empty stands, looking for more change. We wandered around the interior of the store for about an hour, but didn't find anything of interest. There was an odd product here and there, but what we found was either broken or of no use to us. We did get a few laughs out of the decades-old packaging and displays we came across. The clothes and hairstyles that were popular when the store was last open were cringeworthy. "Would you like some popcorn?" Theo called out from where he stood behind the counter of the store's pathetic excuse of a snack bar. "How about some chips?" He held up the dirty bag and illuminated it with his flashlight. I didn't recognize the brand. "They are only..." He held the bag close to his eyes as he read something. "A few decades out of date." He flung the bag at me like a frisbee. It didn't come close to hitting me. The snack bar was at the front of the store, on the opposite side of where we came in. We had walked through the entire store from front to back, and then back again. It was fun, but we didn't have anything to show for it, except the memory and a few photos I had taken. "You ready?" That was my signal that I was ready to leave. "One sec," Theo said as he walked out from behind the counter to over where the large vinyl banner hung on the wall. "I want a souvenir." He tugged the banner off the wall, which sent a cloud of dust into the air when it fell to the floor. "Whoa, check this out." He illuminated the section of the wall that was revealed when he pulled the banner down. I couldn't tell what he was talking about from where I was standing, so I walked over and stood next to him. I followed the beam of his flashlight as he moved it across the wall. "It looks like there used to be an opening here," Theo said. I agreed. It looked like there was an archway that was bricked over and painted. I assumed the banner was placed over that section of the wall to conceal it. "I think we should find out what's on the other side." Theo placed his hand on the wall and turned back to me. "It probably just leads to the store next door." That was my best guess. "Let's find out." He walked around the surrounding area and looked for something to use to break through the bricks. When he returned to the wall, he was carrying a metal bar that looked like it once belonged to a clothes rack. I laughed when he struck the wall and did more damage to his makeshift hammer than he did to the wall. "That's not going to work." "You got a better idea?" "I do." I held up the keys. "There should be something we could use out there." I pointed towards the exit. Most of my father's construction equipment had already been moved onto the property. 15 minutes later, we stood in front of the wall with 2 large hammers and a crowbar. We took turns pounding the mortar that surrounded the bricks, and would then use the crowbar to pry them out. After about 30 minutes of that, we had cleared out enough blocks for us to squeeze through. Since Theon found the opening, I thought it was only fair that he got to go first through the hole. I squatted down and watched as he pulled himself through, then stood in front of what appeared to be a narrow corridor. As he walked forward, he started to sweep his light along the dark shapes that stood silent in the distance. "Holy shit!" Theo yelled in excitement. "It's a fucking arcade!" "What?" I quickly squirmed through the hole and hurried to catch up with him. It really was an arcade. There were 4 rows of machines standing side by side in the narrow room. One row ran along each wall, with the other 2 rows forming a barrier of back-to-back machines down the center of the arcade. In addition to the standard video games, there were also 2 large stages whose contents were hidden behind velvet curtains. There was one on either side of the room, and they were facing each other. The stages were rounded at the front and featured a small table with 3 little stools. In the middle of that table was a coin slot, where you would slide your quarter in to activate whatever was hidden behind a thick curtain. "Do you think they still work?" Theo asked. "Maybe." I replied. But the center doesn't have any power. Do you think your dad would let us keep one? Theo was acting like we had found a secret treasure and deserved a part of the spoils. Unfortunately, I was going to have to kill his excitement. It's not his choice. They belong to whoever owns the shopping center. My dad was just hired to demolish it. That sucks. He started to walk around and check the coin return slots on the machines. Do you think they still have money inside of them? I don't even think any of them have ever been used. The arcade looked like it was set up and then abandoned. The question that kept popping in my mind was, why? Why would someone create this arcade and then seal it away? What was that? Theo stopped and started to shine his flashlight around the room. His eyes followed the beam of light as he swept it from left to right. I don't know. It sounded like a squeaky door hinge to me, but we were in an abandoned strip mall, so it could have been any number of things. Maybe we should leave, I said. The coolness of finding the arcade was starting to be replaced by growing fear that we shouldn't be there. There it is again. Theo walked over to stand next to me. I could tell he was starting to get freaked out as well. When we first heard the noise, we were in the back of the arcade. The little hallway we entered through was in the front. As we made our way back to the front to leave, we came to the break in the rows of machines where the two stages sat across the room from each other. As I turned and shined my phone light towards the stage, I noticed the curtain had been pulled to the side, exposing the creepy animatronic figure that stood upon it. It was covered in dirty, matted black fur and looked like it was supposed to be some sort of humanoid cat. A large faded sign hung on the wall behind it, with the word Hetzi written in large cartoony letters. As we illuminated the figure with our lights, its eyelids suddenly popped up to reveal a pair of shiny green eyes. When we started to back away from it, the eyes swiveled in our direction. I don't think it's supposed to do that, Theo said nervously as he stepped closer to me. I was about to respond, but the sound of metal screeching made us whirl around. The curtain on the other stage had been pulled to the side, revealing another animatronic figure. The new figure was covered in white fur and looked like it was supposed to be a humanoid mouse. It was just as dirty and ragged looking as Hetzi the cat. Hanging on the wall behind it was a sign that said, Jins. When the eyes of Jins clicked open, our momentary paralysis was broken, and we ran down the hall yelling and screaming. As we ran, I glanced behind us to see the cat step down off its stage and start creaking its way towards us. Its eyes clicked every time it blinked. Jins followed behind it. You can run, but you can't hide, a loud cartoony voice taunted us. I couldn't tell which figure had spoken. I didn't care to find out. I was quicker than Theo and made it to the opening first. I dove through the hole, scraping my arms and back as I flailed my way through it. I was almost to the exit of the store when I heard Theo call out, Help! He screamed. He was sitting on his butt with his legs still in the hole. I watched in horror as Hetzi latched onto his ankle and started to pull him back towards the arcade. Now I gotcha! The cartoony voice laughed. I rushed over and grabbed Theo under his armpit and tried to pull him through, but the robotic cat was stronger. Thankfully, the tools we used to make the hole were still on the floor where we left them. I picked up the crowbar and started to jab it through the hole at the robots. Theo was able to get his legs free when the animatronic let go of his ankle to jerk the tool out of my hands. We ran to the front of the store and started to crawl beneath the shutter. I looked back one last time to see the faces of Hetzi and Jins pressed to the hole of the passageway where they were watching as we escaped. I'll get you next time, the voice echoed through the store. Not if I can help it, I thought, then kicked the cinder block free and sent the metal barricade crashing to the ground. We raced home on our bikes, not saying a word to each other. I quickly put my father's keys back where I got them and went to my room. Theo wasn't at school the next day. I considered going over to his house to check on him, but decided to wait. He was probably scared and didn't want to talk about what happened. I was sure he would come find me when he was ready to talk about it. "You're not gonna believe what we found at his site today," my father said to my mother and me that night at the dinner table. I glanced up at him. I bet I could guess what he found. "An arcade! Can you believe it?" He looked over at me. I suspected he thought I would be a bit more excited at the news. "Cool," I said with as much enthusiasm as I could conjure. "It is very cool," he said. Apparently, Moore had the arcade added to the store as a birthday present for his sons, the twins, but they never got to see it because of the accident. From what I can gather, he bricked up the arcade after the funeral and never mentioned it again. "How did you find it?" my mother asked him. "Technically, we didn't. Someone broke into the store last night and busted a hole in the wall. If I had to guess, I'd say they knew what they were looking for, but didn't have time to take anything." "What are they going to do with all the games?" I asked. "They are going to be auctioned off. Apparently, there are a couple of rare machines in the lot. You know those animatronic robots from that pizza place you used to love going to when you were little?" "Cheesy Chuck's," I answered. "Yeah, that place. There were 2 robots like that in the arcade, but they were in really bad shape. What's going to happen to them?" I wanted my father to say that they were going to be turned into scrap. "They were going to be thrown out, but I asked if I could keep them. I was thinking of fixing them up and putting them in our game room. Cool, right? I figured you'd give me a hand. I've got them out in the truck, if you want to run out and take a look."